Good morning, good afternoon, depending if you're on the West Coast or the East Coast. But welcome to another edition of the El Dente Fantasy Football Podcast, live Sunday morning, right before kickoff. We are here to answer all your final fantasy start sit questions. I am joined, as always, by Josh and Ummer. Gentlemen, how are we doing?
Excellent. Excellent.
Right?
Great, great. Glad to be here. Happy Sunday. Week 6 is upon us. We might have our first snow game of the year out in Denver. Looks that
Yeah.
Yep.
game could have some fantasy implications depending if you have a lot of Rams players, which I'm sure a lot of people do, and first snow of the year always spells a little lower point totals. But we'll get to that later, I'm sure. We'll just jump right in with our how we do the show here as we kind of go position by position with some of our hot starts, our cold sits, and some sleepers that we have for you. We do it all kind of predicated on PPR leagues, and then we'll kind of break down some DFS lineups as we at the end of the show. So, Josh, I'll start with you. Give me some hot quarterback sits that you're liking this week thus far.
I'll give you a start that I really like, and that's Jameis Winston. Love Jameis Winston this week.
First
Coming
week
back
back.
for his what's that?
First week back.
Yes, that's right. His first official start. Not counting when he came in
True.
halfway through the game and replaced Fitzmagic. And that you know what? And it's a great game to come back to. I like both quarterbacks in this game, Jameis and Matt Ryan. I expect this game to be a shootout. I'm taking the over everywhere. I think he's got great weapons. Mike Evans is back. You know, last year he wasn't quite in his best form all season. He seems to be back and forth, hot and cold. He had a good rookie season, then a down sophomore year, a great third year, down fourth year. He's having a great fifth year now. Now he's playing great again. I expect both those quarterbacks to really have a good week. And Jameis is a guy that you could have picked up off the waiver wire in a lot of leagues,
Yeah.
as I wrote about, because they just came off their bye week. So he's a guy who was widely available. I love him as a start this week. If you got him, plug him in. Don't worry about it.
And then just to piggyback off that, I mean, especially if you have a quarterback that's on a bye week this week, like Drew Brees and Matt Stafford, he's an excellent streaming option. So yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
I picked him up in a league to sit Drew Brees.
Yeah, there you
Just,
go.
Yeah, and I think he'll have a lot to prove. And usually, when we kind of have mentioned before, and I know Josh, you've mentioned to me personally, just those kind of redemption games where there's just that on the line, and he's kind of finally got his starting role back after even being back 2 weeks ago, but them still going with Fitzpatrick with the hot hand. So I like that. Ummer, do you have any other hot starts out of the quarterback position?
Yeah, completely agree with Matt Ryan and Jameis Winston. I expect that to be offensive air raid, just lots of points for sure. So good starts on both ends there. Um, I think we've touched on this many times now. Andy Dalton, I think he's just a completely different quarterback this year. He's just looking so good in that Bill Lazor style offense. And the Steelers defense has allowed 13 passing touchdowns this year, which is tied for the league most. So expect some passing touchdowns by Andy Dalton this week. So it's a good matchup there. I like Deshaun Watson against Buffalo. He looked pretty good on that Monday night game against Josh's Dallas Cowboys there. Sunday night game, excuse me. So I expect that trend to continue
Jab.
against Buffalo, which is a weaker opponent than Dallas. So yeah, I know he didn't start so hot against Dallas, and then he obviously had the second half, and then obviously overtime. But I expect him to be good throughout this game against Buffalo. So definitely start Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, Buffalo's been kind of an interesting defense to go against. I feel like one week
Hmm.
they shut
Yeah.
quarterbacks, receivers, running backs down, and the next week guys kind of go all out on them. So if I remember correctly, I could be correct me if I'm wrong because I'm kind of blanking out on last week. It's been a long week, but I feel like Buffalo had their on game last week, so maybe this week will be their off week.
Yeah, that was a low scoring game between them and Tennessee where they got the upset by 1 point, I believe. It was
Okay,
13-12 they
cool.
came out with the
Oh,
victory. So,
So my
yeah.
mind's not
So,
much yet. That's good. Still have a little bit of a memory. Um,
so yeah, I expect them to be on the down week this week as
there we go.
opposed to up. So,
Sticking with the
absolutely.
every other trend. So Josh, for some cold sits, who do you got?
Cold is the opportune word because this week I'm sitting Jared Goff.
Mm,
Uh,
there's
he,
that snow
as you
game.
mentioned, the weather in Denver. I mean, I was watching NFL Network this morning. I saw a shot of the field. There's already snow covering the field all over the stadium. I'm sure they'll clean it up a little bit before game time, but he's never played in weather like this. I mean, even going back to his college days, he's a California kid. He's not used to this kind of weather. I still want to start all the receivers as long as they all play, which they all should.
Hmm.
But I'm not trusting Jared Goff. I mean, they have Todd Gurley. If the weather's bad, they can just pound the ball on the ground all day long. Um, he could prove me wrong. It's possible he's good, but his first cold weather game in the NFL in a big matchup like this, not for me. Sitting him.
Yeah. Obviously, weather always is an implication, and especially as you mentioned, his first one. So,
Yeah.
Umar, I'm sure you probably agree. I would assume, but if not, let us know, or if you have some other cold sits.
No, I actually do agree. And I don't know if you guys remember, but when Jared Goff was going through the combine process and Cleveland had the number one overall pick, if you guys remember during his pro day, Hugh Jackson was spraying the football with water to see how he would throw with the inclement ball just to see his effectiveness because of the, inclement weather in Cleveland. And some of his throws were not so good. They were wobbly, they were off target. So I completely agree that if it's snowing and it's cold there, I mean, I know it's not the same as having a wet ball, but a hard frozen ball, I know lots of quarterbacks have said it's hard to grip it and hard to really throw it well. So yeah, if he's raised in California and he's used to playing in warmer climate games, Jared Goff is not going to be a good option to start. So I agree. If you have another option, probably swap out Jared Goff. I expect it to be a very low scoring, defensive, run heavy game. So yeah,
Well, and
start the running backs, which we'll get to, but yeah,
I just want
Jared
to
Goff is a good sit.
I just want to jump in before you, Umar, get to a different quarterback, Sid. But so I grew up in Denver, as I probably mentioned, played football in high school in the cold, and I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough, the weather. I know it gets mentioned, but it doesn't get maybe emphasized, and I think it's a huge deal, especially that football. It does get wet. It gains weight. If you don't play it often, it's hard to get used to. If you remember, even back when Peyton Manning started with the Broncos, that's when he went to wearing two gloves just because he wasn't used to throwing a cold
Right.
football, playing in a
Yep.
dome his whole career. And so
Yep.
his stats were dramatically different wearing that glove. And then obviously at the end of his career, he wore a glove all the time just to try to stay consistent. So something to look for. I don't know. Maybe Goff will throw Teddy to Goff. I don't know if he'll throw some gloves on there, but we'll see. All right, well, we'll move on. Any
It's
other?
just so funny. I'm sorry, Ryan. It's just so funny
Yeah.
that for all the deficiencies Hugh has as a coach, he thought to go out and spray water on a ball for Jared Goff. Like of all the things that he should
Right.
improve upon, he's out there spraying a ball
Yeah.
to test the
And then
quarterback. Just
he trades his pick anyway, so it doesn't matter.
right.
Yeah.
And they had,
Whatever.
I believe they had did they have one that year or were they number two that year? I think they were the two overall pick that year.
They had one because
They
they
had
took
number one.
Garrett.
Yep.
No, that was the year they traded the Rams because the Rams got or not the Rams. The Rams traded the Titans I thought for one, and then the Eagles traded the Browns for two, and they got Wentz. Maybe I'm missing years.
No, no, no. You're right.
Yeah,
You're
you know
right.
what? You're right.
Garrett,
Yeah,
they took Garrett one over. I don't know. That doesn't
that's
matter.
right.
That's
Right.
neither here nor there. Because I just remember Eagles fans always give him crap because the Browns could have had Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Seems
Yeah, that's
seems
true.
logical.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess to your point, Emmer, Goff didn't throw a good wet ball at combines. So that's why they traded out of the pick.
No, and that was even good weather too. So with the wet ball, it was just not a good outing there. Another sit I'd probably keep on your bench or quarterback you keep on your bench is Ryan Tannehill. Actually, late to the injury report, Ryan Tannehill is actually questionable coming into this game against Chicago. So the possibility of Brock Osweiler playing, which is obviously a definite sit, but definitely monitor that situation up until game time to see whether Ryan Tannehill is going to play. And even if he does play, his status may be questionable throughout the entire game. And they're playing the Chicago defense, which if you haven't, got on that bandwagon yet, they're going to be a top defense throughout the rest of this year. So yeah, avoid that situation if you can. And then one more sit
Real
that I have
quick
for you
before you move,
is
I did get an update from Field Yates. I don't know how up to date this is. It says 5 minutes ago, but he says Tannehill is out. In fact,
there you go. There you go. So yeah,
Which-
sit Ryan Tannehill there.
which I have starting currently. So that I'm gonna let you talk, and I'm gonna go make some moves.
I've been feeling a lot better about my Bears defense. I'm down in quite a hole,
Jeez.
one of my leagues, due to Saquon Barkley, but I've got the Bears defense, so I feel a little better about that now.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
and let me tell you,
So
but
there's
I'm not picking up Brock Osweiler to start. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely not. So I mean, yeah, just obviously, I mean, we'll get to it later, but obvious start then is Chicago Bears defense because Brock Osweiler is going to be an absolute mess. The last sit that I want to talk about for quarterbacks is Derek Carr. They are playing in London, and historically, the Raiders have played poorly in London. So I don't
Mm.
expect that trend to be any better. I think Seattle, this is their first time playing in London, actually, so they may be a little bit more amped up. They may be ready for that game to go. So yeah, I'd avoid Derek Carr this week.
Yeah, those London games are always tricky ones to navigate. Um,
Hmm.
any other quarterbacks you guys want to mention before we move on to running backs, start or sits, or sleeper starts, if you will?
The only other quarterback I really want to mention as a sit is to sit Joe Flacco. I know some people that offense has actually been a lot better than people thought through the air this year. John Brown's really come on. Um, as long as he's healthy, he's always been very talented. He just can't stay on the field. Last week, Joe Flacco threw 56 pass attempts and completed only 29.
Mm.
So he threw under 50% completion rate, zero touchdowns, one interception. I expect him to be a high volume passer all throughout the year because their ground game has been ineffective. But I mean, if he's throwing at a 50% or less completion rate, just stay away from Flacco.
Good. Yeah.
They're also playing Tennessee, which has a pretty good defense. So yeah,
Right.
avoid that one if you can. The sleeper start that I would make is actually Baker Mayfield. I know we're hitting on this that he's becoming better and better each and every week. He finally had his first 300-yard game last week,
Mm-hmm.
and they're playing Los Angeles, whose defense is not as great as we were expecting them as the preseason started. So I wouldn't be surprised if Baker Mayfield actually has a pretty good day on Sunday to pretty good day today. Excuse me.
Yeah, we're here. Sunday's here. Do we know, off the top of your head, is Bosa playing finally yet, or is he still out in that game?
Last I heard, he was questionable.
Yeah, he's questionable. We're not going to know. I think he's going to play. I mean, but even regardless whether he plays or not, I agree with Hummer. I like him as a sleeper start this week. I had another league where I had to pick him up as well. I have a lot of Drew Brees,
Yeah,
so I had to pick up both
it's a good
Mayfield and
problem to
Winston
have.
Yeah.
yeah, in different leagues.
Well, then I'll just before we move on, I'll as we were talking. So, like I said, I had Tannehill in one of my leagues. I dropped him and picked up. I mean, it was a pretty slim waiver wire, but I picked up Trubisky. How do you feel about that for this week?
That's fine.
Yeah, it's not a bad spot start. I don't expect him to have 6 touchdowns again like he did 2 weeks ago, but I think as we were talking about where Brock Osweiler is playing for Miami, that will give the Bears offense enough opportunities. So I think Trubisky should do enough with those opportunities to make him fantasy relevant. Maybe he's not going to have eye gouging numbers, but I think it's a good spot start for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, they could easily force one or two turnovers and give Trubisky a short field situation to score from.
Exactly.
So good. I wouldn't go out of my way to start him, but just like Ummer said, he's a good spot start.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
as you said, Josh, I have Drew Brees in that league. So that's hence why I'm on this conundrum of quarterbacks. So why I was starting Tannehill even in the first place. Okay, great. Good advice for the quarterback position. Let's move on to running backs. Omer, I'll keep it over with you. Some of your hot starts for the week.
Sure. So Atlanta and Tampa Bay, Devontae Freeman is still out, or they ruled him out, excuse me. So Tevin Coleman becomes an instant start there. The Tampa Bay game is just going to be very high scoring between Atlanta and Tampa Bay, both in the air and on the running game. Tevin Coleman has looked really effective, especially this whole year, playing for Devontae Freeman since he's been out with injuries. So yeah, definitely start Tevin Coleman. Um, I like Chris Carson over Mike Davis in that running game in Seattle. I think he's definitely looking a little bit more effective, looking a little bit more dynamic, and I think he's going to be the lead dog this week in London. So I expect him to go off against the Raiders. Sonny Michel, the rookie, I mean, he's looking great, and I expect him to do some damage against Kansas City this week. So definitely start Sonny Michel. And one name that's been a little bit down, but I expect him to really pick it up, especially after the bye week, is Jordan Howard. Jordan Howard is getting more touches than Tariq Cohen, but Tariq Cohen's ability in the passing game has led him to be on the field more. But I expect with the bye week, Matt Nagy has said that he wanted to get Jordan Howard more involved in the offense, get him more touches. And I think this matchup against Miami, as we talked about, I think they'll get enough opportunities on offense where Jordan Howard can get those short field opportunities. I think just he'll be a good breakout star the rest of the season out.
Yeah. I wanted to mention at least Sonny Michel real quick. He did pop up on the injury report this week with a knee thing. When asked, he said he was good to go, but he still is a game time decision listed as questionable. Do you think that's more typical Patriots kind of just putting everyone on the injury report like they would do, or do you think there's actual concern that he may not play tonight?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. He was a game time decision in the BCS title game against Alabama, and he balled out there. So,
I like that. I like that. So anyone
Yeah.
that is reserved or worried, go ahead and keep him in your lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Ryan and Number. I think that's just typical Patriots. Everyone is always questionable. Although I will say this, while I agree that I think he's a good start, I would lean more towards James White, honestly, over Sonny Michel, just because I expect this to be a high-scoring game, and James White is, the pass-catching running back. I don't necessarily know, to be honest with you, who will be leading this game. I could see both teams, sharing the lead, going back and forth, neither team being able to really ease up on the gas. So while Michelle is a good start, I think I like James White a little better, especially if it's a PPR league. If it's a standard league, I could see you going Michelle, PPR. I like White a little better. I'm really glad you said Jordan Howard. I like Jordan Howard going into this week. I like Tariq Cohen. I like them both, especially now hearing the news that Tannehill's out. They're going to be starting Brock Osweiler. I fully expect the Bears to have the lead for the entire game. And in the second half, I expect them to, salt that lead and run the ball and give Jordan Howard his carries. One other running back that's really interesting that I like for this week is Marshawn Lynch. I love the revenge game.
Mm.
Love it.
yeah.
I'm always a big revenge game guy. I think a couple weeks back we had Isaiah Crowell. We saw that against the Browns, and he balled out for the Jets. He had
Mm-hmm.
he had like 130 yards in that game and
Two
two
touchdowns.
touchdowns.
Yeah.
So I like Marshawn Lynch. I mean, Pete Carroll himself came out and said that he said he thought Lynch looked faster. He said he asked him in person. He said, "Where was all that speed before?" So I'm sure he was having a good time with him. But I like Marshawn Lynch this week.
It doesn't something about Lynch just seem like he'll just flourish overseas, over in London?
Yeah.
Did you see what was it? Not this past off season, but like two or 3 years ago, like right after he retired from the Seahawks, Skittles
Yeah.
sponsored and sent him over to Ireland,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they just sent him and a film crew, and he just walked around, did whatever, and they filmed it, and it was
Mm-hmm.
hilarious.
Yeah. I think he was all. I think he was all over the Eastern Sea, like the European seaboard. He was on like a
Yeah,
camel somewhere, and
yeah.
then yeah. So I think
He did
he'll.
he did the Running Wild with Bear Grylls. Oh, that was hilarious
Hmm.
too.
Oh, yeah.
So
He's a funny guy. He's a very very cool human being.
yeah. So I think he'll flourish over there as well. As much as Derek Carr is a sit, I think I agree. Marshawn Lynch is a start.
Hmm.
Um, Cool. Moving to Ummer. Any or wait, we already did you. So now we're on sits, correct? Josh, we'll keep it with you with any cold running back sits.
I want to sit Dalvin Cook this week. I think he's expected to play, but I don't believe him to be 100%. I believe he himself said he's not 100%. If he doesn't play, then obviously we don't have to worry about the situation. But I think that he's going to play, or he's at least going to give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
He may be a game time decision, but I would sit him regardless. I also want to sit Adrian Peterson. He is expected to play. Chris Thompson is out, as per Adam Schefter. So that limits the running backs a little more. So you would think that would give Peterson a better shot to have a good week, but I don't believe him to be 100% either. They're going against a good defense and the Panthers, and they're gonna have to air the ball out if they want to win that game. So sit Dalvin Cook, sit Adrian Peterson, both for the same reason. They're not 100%, even if they do play. I don't want anything to do with either one of them.
Keeping it with Dalvin Cook, if you're sitting him and say you have Latavius Murray as a handcuff, do you start him or you're just staying away from that Vikings backfield if at all possible?
To be honest, I would stay away from that Vikings backfield. I think they're the only team in the NFL without a rushing touchdown.
That sounds about right. Kirk Cousins definitely been carrying that offense so far,
Yes, he has.
as he's had to do much of his career. So, Ummer, over to you. Some cold sits for you, running back position.
Yeah, just to hammer home that Adrian Peterson, Chris Thompson, just Washington running back situation there. Avoid that at all costs. So even if you want to be sneaky and pick up a Capri Bibbs, off the waiver wire. Just the Panthers defense is pretty stout, and yeah, I just avoid all Washington running backs for sure. So definitely agree with Josh there. I would sit Lamar Miller against Buffalo. I know we said that Deshaun Watson is a good start, but I don't like the running game in Houston at all so far. It's just not been effective. Lamar Miller's been pretty poor. Alfred Blue has looked good at times, especially last week against Dallas and the week before. But Lamar Miller has just been completely absent, and I think injured on top of that as well. So it's just I'd sit Lamar Miller. Alfred Blue I'd also keep on the bench as well. So avoid Houston running backs. Isaiah Crowell, I know he went off for 200 plus yards last week against Indianapolis and the two scores. Or sorry, that was against
Denver.
Denver. Yeah, that was against Denver.
Just wanted
Uh,
to make me say it, huh?
Oh,
sorry,
Ryan knows all too
sorry.
well.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to rub salt in the wound there. He's playing Indianapolis this week. That's what I had on my mind. So even though it's a little bit of a better matchup compared to Denver's running defense, a little bit better. I don't expect him to replicate those numbers. I think he'll be effective, but not to that extent where it's like definitely put him in your starting lineup. I'd probably keep him on your bench.
Yeah, the troubling thing with Crowell, even with last week's crazy numbers, I mean, he had a 76-yard run and then like another decently big one, is he seems to be the more, obviously he's going to vulture touchdowns, but him and Bilal Powell are still splitting carries 50-50. Even last week he had 200, I think 30 yards he finished with, and Bilal Powell finished with 99 yards, and their carries were literally split right down the middle. So it wasn't like he was giving the lion's share of the workload. So little concerning moving forward that he's kind of dependent on vulturing those touchdowns, but yeah, we'll see how he does against that Indy defense.
Yeah,
Any
exactly as you said. I mean, based on the 200 yards or whatever, he had three long runs of 77, I believe 54, and then 36. But if you take all that away, I think he went 12 for like 88 or something like that. So very not
good,
as
but
effective
pedestrian.
numbers.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
so we'll see what he does moving forward. But I traded for him recently, so that was as painful as it was that he did against my Broncos, and even more painful that I had him on my bench. Moving forward,
Right.
hopefully that will spark a little something for him. We'll see though. Any running back sleeper starts, gentlemen? Whoever wants to start.
Um, no, I mean pretty much everyone that Umar talked about, I agree with. I mean, at this point, I don't think we can call T.J. Yeldon a sleeper
I don't
anymore.
think
I
so.
mean,
Yeah,
but he's someone who I'm all over.
yeah,
I'm all over T.J. Yeldon, especially with with Fournette being out. And honestly, when Fournette eventually does come back, I think they're going to split. It's going to be much more of a committee than it was. I think T.J. Yeldon is really showing what he can do. We all knew he was always a good pass catching back, but now he's just a good all around running back.
yeah.
I think that's going to be a really muddy situation when Fournette comes back, and that's what I'm going to not want either guy. But for now, I mean, Yeldon everywhere.
Yeah, I think if you had Fournette, you should have tried to sell him weeks ago. If you still have hung on to him, do you even think you can get any value for him? Or at this point, is it worth just keeping him and hoping he does something when he comes back?
He'll still be effective when he comes back, but yeah, I completely agree with Josh. I think they're going to start giving some more carries and some more touches to TJ Yeldon now because of the injury history for Leonard Fournette. Because I mean, he got injured in his rookie year too, so I mean, they could see that he's not as durable as they were hoping he's going to be. So yeah, I think they'll probably mix in a lot more TJ Yeldon than fantasy owners are hoping they would. So
Yeah,
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 definitely hang on to both running backs for sure.
yeah. If you had him and you could have sold him, you were smart. I think it's unfortunate moving forward. He's not going to be the Leonard Fournette you thought you drafted. I do have one sleeper that I could be off my rock here because the team they're playing, but I just think with the weather, we've kind of brought up that Bronco game. Royce Freeman, I think, could be somewhat of a sleeper start. He's production wise has been very affected all year. Usage wise has been a bit of a letdown. That Denver offense, for some reason, with his yards per carry average, tends to go away from him too early. I think today that changes with the weather. Obviously, Philip Lindsay and him have been just such an awesome 1-2 punch with their change of pace. But Lindsay's running style, not to say he can't be effective considering he went to school all his life in Colorado, played in the snow. But I think the ground and pound style that Freeman has, it's going to be a dogfight even against that tough Rams interior. I think he can still, get one of those muddy games of 70, 80 yards and one or two touchdowns that would be viable for a spot start sleeper. So just something I want to throw in there. I'm not the expert, but the host can throw something in every now and then.
No, I agree with you. That's a great call. I mean, and last week Chris Carson had 127 yards all purpose against the Rams.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
they can be run on. 119 of that, I believe, came, or 118 of that came on the ground. So yeah, I agree with that. With the weather, 3 out of the past 4 weeks, Case Keenum hadn't thrown a touchdown until last week. He went 3 weeks without throwing one. So
Yeah,
yeah, I can fully. That's a good call.
we'll see. We'll rerun the tape again on that next week. Uh, Great. Well, let's move on to wide receivers. Wide receivers are always, as we mention every week, a little tougher just because there's so many of them to go through. But
Right.
give me your hottest starts. Umar, we'll start with you.
Sure. I like Kiki Kuti against Buffalo.
Yes.
It's
I
fun to say
like
too.
him over Will Fuller now because I think even though Will Fuller was healthy against Dallas, you could definitely see that Kuti was getting more involvement compared to Will Fuller. So I think we could see that if both are healthy, Kuti has definitely separated himself as the deep threat and the more reliable option opposite DeAndre Hopkins. So, yeah, I definitely like Kiki Kuti going forward, and Will Fuller's stock has definitely dropped now. Another receiver that I like, Chester Rogers of Indianapolis against New York Jets. T.Y. Hilton's out this week. Ryan Grant's going to be the number one in that offense, and Chester Rogers is going to be the number two. Against New England, I think he had 11 targets and 8 receptions. So definitely Chester Rogers is getting more involved, especially with T.Y. Hilton being out. So I like him this week against the New York Jets, possibly get a score this time as well as that high involvement as far as targets. And last receiver, Josh Gordon against Kansas City. I don't know if
Yes.
anybody's following Tom Brady on Instagram, but he posted a cryptic message with Josh Gordon saying attack, I believe, or I don't remember the exact wording on it,
Yep.
but is that something that we should be paying attention to? I think so. So I expect Josh Gordon to get heavy involvement on Sunday night on prime time against a hot team in Kansas City, and I wouldn't be surprised if he has a classic Josh Gordon game that we saw reminiscent of 2014.
Oh, Tom
Oh.
Brady, the social media goat, huh?
Hummer, you stole my. I really didn't think either of you guys would have seen that. That was perfect. I was very excited to talk about the attack post that Brady
Attack,
made.
that's what it was.
Yes,
That's what it
yes.
was.
Oh, that's very when Tom Brady says something, I think everyone listens.
I
So
think so.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
agree.
well, that'll be good. I love the Kiki Kute. I would sing the Drake song, but I'm not going to.
Oh,
Um,
good.
yeah, we're gonna stay away from that. But loved him in college. Loved him at Texas Tech. So we were kind of
Yeah.
waiting for him to really take the stage at the NFL level. Obviously as a rookie and being a later round pick, you're gonna have to earn your keep. But good to see him more in that role in that offense. So I like that start a lot. Josh,
Hmm.
we'll go over to you with any hot starts you got.
I like all the guys Ummer said. Love Josh Gordon. Also in that same game, I like Julian Edelman. This is going to be second week back. I mean, we saw his first week back. He hadn't lost any of the
No,
chemistry
and he was
from
targeted on every drive almost.
Oh yeah.
Right, right. And again, as we said, I expect this to be a much higher scoring game. I expect that there'll be critical moments in the games, like third and long or critical plays that need to be made. And when Tom Brady needs a critical play made, he's going to turn to his guy. He's going to go to Julian Edelman. I expect him to be heavily involved. I think Gordon has a shot to have bigger plays, flashier plays, 40-yard touchdowns and long targets. But Julian Edelman's going to be the guy that picks up that 3rd and 6. He's going to be the guy that gets those over the middle targets. So I like Julian Edelman. I also like Tyler Boyd this week. Obviously, everyone's going to start AJ Green. AJ Green's going to get the primary coverage in that game, but the Steelers give up the third most fantasy points to wide receivers. So I like Tyler Boyd a lot this week as well.
Yeah, that receiving court in Cincy has looked pretty good this year. We're just kind of waiting for John Ross to finally show up. He seems to get one or two plays a game, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Right, right. Well, John Ross, I mean, he's talented, but I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to say anything negative about the guy, but I mean, he's kind of like a Deshaun Jackson. He's kind of like a Tavon Austin. He's just a smaller, really speedy guy.
Yeah,
I wouldn't necessarily call him a one-trick pony, but I mean, that's mostly, his strength is hot route.
yeah. Oh,
So,
even
Yeah.
remnant a little bit of I don't know if you'll agree with this whatsoever. Obviously, their body type is way different, but even a little remnant of Will Fuller, who is kind of based
yeah.
on those big play moments, and he can do a
Hmm.
little more. But yeah, Ross. I mean, they kind of knew what they were drafting when they drafted him. They were drafting him strictly for
Right.
that 4.2 speed,
Hmm.
and that's what they've gotten. So
Yeah, and that's the big thing with speed guys when you draft them out of college is that you're expecting them to hit the home run play every time, but you're hoping that once they get to the NFL that they develop more of a route tree and they become more of an actual all-around receiver. And you can see that with unfortunately he's been hurt primarily this whole season, but Marquise Goodwin, I mean, obviously he went to the Olympics as a sprint guy, as a speed
Yeah.
guy. So I mean, we know he has speed to burn,
Hmm.
but with all the injuries that happened to him last year, Marquise Goodwin had to develop more of his receiving ability to become a better overall receiver. So now he has more of the route tree. He's more effective to move the chains as opposed to just being that home run guy. So hopefully John Ross can take a page out of Goodwin's book and really develop more of his route tree and more of his overall receiving ability.
Well, you mentioned Goodwin. Let's keep it right there then with Niner receivers. Are you starting any of them? Garcon, Goodwin. Obviously, with Beathard in, that fantasy has kind of taken a toll a little bit on that offense. Do you like any of them this week?
If I had to pick a Niners receiver, which, if you're pointing a gun to my head and I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Pierre Garcon. He seems to be getting more of the target share from CJ Beathard. Marquise Goodwin is still questionable and just not as effective as people are hoping he has been. Dante Pettis, the rookie, is still out. Trent Taylor, their rookie sensation last year, he's dealing with back injury, so he's not looking as effective in the offense either. So yeah, based on the attrition, it's Pierre Garcon by default. And I mean, I keep hammering it home, but George Kittle, I think he's going to make the Pro Bowl this year. I wouldn't be surprised. So, but we'll get to tight ends later.
Yeah,
George Kittle is my favorite Niners receiver. So
yeah, he's all they got. I don't know
There you
what
go.
I don't know what John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan did this offseason, throwing coins in a wishing well or what, but they have just been plagued with injuries, and it is, yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost unfortunate. Kind of the young, darling team that everyone was kind of hopeful for, and there is no health left in that team to even hope for anything to happen. So, well, we're there. Okay, so let's do receiver sits. Yeah, is that what we're on? I
hmm
think I lost track already. So, okay, Amr, we'll keep it with you with some cold receiver sits. Any of those Rams receivers are you sitting? Or are we keeping those on?
I'm actually, if you can avoid starting any Rams receivers, I probably would. If I had to pick a receiver to start, I'd probably maybe say Robert Woods out of those options. But Brandon Cooks and Cooper Kupp, I'd probably leave on the bench. Cooper Kupp's actually not a bad flex play either. He's got good ability to move the change. It's got those short yardage and things along those lines. So he's not a bad start. But as we talked about in the cold weather, I don't expect it to be a very air it out type of game, very ground pound, very defense. So if you can avoid it, I would. But Robert Woods probably would be the best of that bunch. As we talked about, no Ryan Tannehill, so I would avoid Miami receivers. So Kenny Stills, I keep it on the bench. Even if Ryan Tannehill was playing, just Chicago's defense is pretty fearsome right now, so Kenny Stills wouldn't be all that effective. Christian Kirk, he had a sensational game against San Francisco, but he played San Francisco. So playing against Minnesota this week, I expect that defense to be a little bit better and limit his effectiveness. So yeah, Christian Kirk is still a good overall prospect, definitely dynasty leagues as well, and for the rest of the season. But this week against Minnesota, I would avoid it. With Jameis Winston back, you'd think Deshaun Jackson would be a good start, but historically, Deshaun Jackson has not played well with Jameis Winston. It's usually been Chris Godwin, Adam Humphries, and definitely obviously Mike Evans in that offense that's getting more of the target share compared
right.
to Deshaun Jackson. So, I mean, we may see a flip, but I don't expect that to be any sort of. I don't expect that to be any different, especially with the revitalized offense. But I would sit Deshaun Jackson for sure.
So the last time, I think it was week 2 or 3, when we said sit Deshaun Jackson, first play of the game, 77-yard
Yeah,
touchdown reception. So let's
I know.
we'll see if
Yeah.
I mean, to your point though, the rest of that game he didn't do much. That was obviously with Fitzpatrick at quarterback. So, but I agree with you. Historically, he has don't want to say struggled, but just hasn't really been targeted much with
Yeah.
Winston. So yeah,
No,
I
I
think
mean,
that's a
and
good start.
that's what he does. Deshaun, he'll get a normal stat line for Deshaun. And I wrote about this back in the summer when I was talking about best ball leagues because Deshaun Jackson is the perfect best ball uh, best ball league player because you never want to have to make the decision to start him
Yeah,
because when you want to start him, he'll catch you, 3 catches for 20 yards. And then when you sit him, he'll catch the same amount of catches, 3 catches, but those 3 catches will go for 100 yards and a touchdown. And
Exactly.
that's the kind of guy he is. So I completely agree. He's a low volume, big play, speedy kind of guy.
yeah, he's the old school John Ross. So
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, I was just about to hit on that. I was like, we talked about it before, but he's one of those guys that just didn't develop his route tree.
Yeah. So, all right, Josh, any cold sits for you, or what cold sits do you have?
I'm gonna stick with some of the guys I've been saying all year long. Corey Davis, I don't trust him. I mean, he had one big game, but that's all he's had so far is one big game. I mean, he's such a talented player. It's a shame he's really being held back by Marcus Mariota. And
Mm-hmm.
now part of it is because Mariota's injured right now, so we can't say too much against him. But even when he hasn't been injured, he hasn't really been playing that well. Tennessee may have to reevaluate that whole situation, to be honest, because Corey Davis, he's such a skilled athlete. He has all the tools. He's got the size. He's got the speed. He's got great hands. He's not in a good offense. He's going to be held back by that offense. Luckily for Tennessee, they're winning games off the back of their defense right now. But I don't want anything to do with Corey Davis.
Yeah.
Another sit for me is Crabtree. Similar to when I was talking about Flacco earlier. Even if he does air out the ball, John Brown has taken over that number one receiver role for the Falcons, or I'm sorry, for the Ravens rather. Wrong bird. Um, so yeah, I don't like Crabtree as much. I mean, he's a good play if you need safety. You know, if you already have a little bit of a lead, maybe if you were the guy who has Saquon Barkley and Alshon Jeffrey in your lineup, you just want to, someone who's going to save, catch a couple balls. He's not going to get a zero. He's not going to lose your week, but he's not going to win it either.
Yeah.
Those are kind of guys I tend to avoid. To be honest, I always go for upside, so I'm sitting Crabtree as well.
Yeah, it's been. I agree with that sit for sure, but it's been kind of fun to see the revitalization of John Brown's career. Had so much talent down in Arizona, and then just kind of with some injuries and whatnot, and scheme just fell off the map, and now we're truly seeing his talent on display once again. So, well, great. I don't know if you want to mention any other starts or excuse me, sits, or if you guys had any sleepers you wanted to mention at the receiver position.
As far as sleepers, I don't know if it's necessarily a sleeper anymore, but Tyler Lockett in the Seattle offense.
Mm-hmm.
Doug
Yep.
Baldwin has only played in 3 games this year, but just even in those 3 games, he's looked very ineffective. Tyler Lockett leads the team in targets with 28, so definitely Doug Baldwin has moved on. Sorry. Russell Wilson has moved on from Doug Baldwin and moved on to Tyler Lockett, and especially in this game over the pond in London, I expect Tyler Lockett to get more involved compared to Doug Baldwin because even when he's been playing, Doug Baldwin just hasn't looked the same fantasy star that we're used to seeing in previous years. So yeah, definitely pick up Tyler Lockett. I don't think he's much of a sleeper anymore though.
Yeah,
I
it's
agree with that short term. I completely agree with that. I disagree a little long term though. I think Baldwin is still the guy there. He just hasn't been healthy.
hmm
He and Lockett, he's scored I think in all but 1 week so far, maybe 2 weeks at most. I know he scored 3 consecutive weeks to open up the season. But he's another one who's a bit of a deep ball guy. I mean, he can do a little more. He has okay hands. And they did just sign him to a contract, so they believe in Lockett. But he again, I mean, Russell Wilson, he benefited from Wilson bombing it, 50 plus yards out to Lockett, and his touchdown I think was like a 30-yarder as well. So he tends to benefit from the deep balls, whereas Baldwin is more of a PPR guy. He can get you 8, 9, 10 catches in a game. He only had one target last week, but he came out and said he's only at 80% health. So I think going forward, once he feels better, I think he will be the guy again. It's just unfortunate that the Schottenheimer offense is what's really holding him back. There, and it's working, and that's the thing that is really affecting those receivers and Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was the number 2 fantasy quarterback coming into the season, pretty much consensus.
yeah,
But he's being held back because the Schottenheimer offense, the ground game, Chris Carson, Mike Davis, that split eventually, maybe Rashad Penny.
yeah,
We'll see. Uh, so, yeah, while I agree in the short term, Umar, I completely agree for this week. But I think give it 2, 3 more weeks, Baldwin will be back as the main receiving threat there.
yeah. In this game specifically, if it's one or the other, I agree. I like Lockett as the one. I personally kind of like both actually, just because of that Raiders secondary and what they've given up. We've seen what they've given up to Browns receivers. We've seen what they've given up to Bronco receivers. I could see both of them having decent weeks if Russell Wilson is given even 2 seconds in the pocket with that awful Swiss cheese offensive line. Um,
Ugh.
but,
Yeah.
but yeah, if it's one or the other, I go Lockett. But I would not feel completely uncomfortable starting both. So, um, okay. Any other receivers you want to mention before we move on to the tight end, the poorest tight end position?
Yeah.
No, I think I'm all right as far as
Yep.
receivers go. Move on to tight ends.
All right.
Yep.
All right. So
I
if
got
you have
Kelsey.
a
Save it for DFS.
okay, perfect. We'll mention it then. For tight ends, if you have Gronk, Kelsey, or Ertz, start him. Other than that, or Kittle, you're kind of screwed. But we'll let you guys discuss. Start with you. Any besides those four, any ones you're excited about?
Yeah, I got a good couple plays that probably not everybody's aware of, but Cameron Brate. So here's a fun fact for you. Jameis Winston has thrown double-digit touchdowns to only two receivers on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One of them is obviously Mike Evans, and the second one is Cameron Brate with 16. So Cameron Brate is his more favorable tight end compared to the newly drafted OJ Howard. I mean, second year, I know, obviously, but even when OJ Howard was on the field last year, Jameis Winston was favoring Cameron Brate in the red zone and to convert crucial third downs. So I think even though OJ Howard is going to play, he had a questionable status coming into this game. He is going to play this week. I still expect Cameron Brate to get more of Jameis Winston's attention compared to OJ Howard. So definitely start Cameron Brate, and especially they're playing Atlanta. So I mean, we already talked about it. That's going to be high offense, definitely for sure. So Cameron Brate, I expect to get a touchdown, possibly even two in the red zone. Um, Eric Swope of Indianapolis. Now, Eric Ebron is hurt coming into this game. He is most likely going to play based on some of the last news that I read. But even against New England, we saw that touchdown that eventually got recalled back by the officials in that game. But Eric Swope is going to get more involvement because Eric Ebron may not be at 100%. So
Well,
he could be a sneaky start.
that would have been his second touchdown, would it not have been the one that got called back? He still had one, didn't he?
I think you're right, actually. Yeah, that would have been his second
Yeah,
touchdown.
I
So
remember
you're
watching the
right.
game and like, oh, Ebron fans are just crying right now. And then it got called
Yeah,
back.
I
Very
think
next play, they go to Ebron, and Ebron gets his second. So
Yeah, I think we talked about that on the podcast last week. So yeah, definitely Eric Swope is a guy that will get more involvement, especially with Eric Ebron being hurt. So I wouldn't be surprised if he, gets some good target share there and possibly even a touchdown, just like last week against New England. And the last one I have for you is C.J. Azuma,
mm-hmm.
Cincinnati Bengals tight end. Tyler Croft is not playing. And obviously, Tyler Eifert is out for the rest of the year, unfortunately. So I don't expect CJ Azuma to go off and be like the savior for your fantasy roster if that's what you're hoping. But I expect him to get enough involvement in that offense, especially against Pittsburgh, who we already talked about as a very porous defense, that he'll be effective, possibly in the red zone, possibly to convert some crucial third downs. But yeah, definitely enough to put in your starting lineup if you need a spot start. And he'll be effective for sure.
Yeah. Before we move to you, Josh, I just want to at least mention, I know we're on tight ends, but Dalvin Cook has been updated to out for today's game. So I
Oh,
guess his
okay.
pregame
Good.
workout did not go well. Hamstring flared up. So he is out. Murray is the starter. Maybe a little more tempting, but I would still stay away.
Yeah, agreed.
So
But
all
at least now you don't have to make that decision because I mean, even knowing Dalvin Cook probably wasn't the best start, it's hard to get away from him because you
mhm.
probably drafted him very high. I mean, he's a very talented running back. It's so hard to sit the guys that you picked in like the second round of your draft. So I think it's better that he's out.
Yeah, it helps gives you some clarity, if you will. So
Yep.
perfect. All right, well back to tight ends. Josh, anyone else? You have a small selection there.
No, I really do, and there. You said at the very top of the segment on tight ends. I mean, if you got one of the big three, you're solid. And my overall recommendation for tight end is trade to get one of Gronk, Kelsey, Ertz. You might even be able to throw Jimmy Graham in there. Not quite to the same level as those guys, but I like Jimmy Graham a lot.
George Kittle.
Rogers has come out and said we need to get him more involved in the red zone. He's had 2 touchdowns this year, but one got called back due to a holding penalty completely on the other side of the field, irrelevant to the play whatsoever. But Rodgers likes him in the red zone. We saw what he did last year with Russell Wilson in the red zone. He's a big body. He can box out and just, get the jump ball from his basketball background. The other guy that I liked that Ummer didn't mention is Vance McDonald for this week. Again, that should be a high-scoring game. Roethlisberger likes McDonald. That stiff arm. Still haven't gotten over it.
Mm.
That was such an amazing stiff arm. I know that they also have Jesse James there as a tight end, so it can get a little confusing. But I believe Vance McDonald to be the better talent. He's just, as Ummer mentioned in a previous podcast, he's very inconsistent. I like him this week, though. I think he's good. The Cameron Brate, perfect call. I heard one of the greatest analogies I've ever heard in my life the other day in regards to Cameron Brate. Um, Cameron Brate is like if you're OJ Howard and James Winston is your girlfriend and you bring him to a party. Cameron Brate is her ex-boyfriend that you don't want to leave them two alone in a room when you go to go talk to your friends or go get a drink. You don't want to leave the two of them alone because they have such good history together and chemistry
Mm.
from before you even came into the picture. And unfortunately, for OJ Howard, he's leaving the two of them alone. I know
Mm.
he's supposed to play, but he's not going to be at 100%. And Jameis loves Cameron Brate.
Yeah.
So even though OJ Howard is, the new shiny toy, he's the new guy. He's probably the more talented tight end. Jameis and Brate have a great connection. So I love him as a start this week. And that was the greatest analogy I've ever heard in regards to fans.
I think you should claim that as your
Pretty
own.
good.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Come on,
So
OJ,
this,
guard that punch bowl.
yeah. Some sits that I have for this week. I want to sit Jeff Swain from the Cowboys. Now, you might think that's an obvious sit, but he's with the state of tight ends, as you alluded to, Ryan. It's hard if you have a guy who's playing a good portion of the offense. You want to start him, and Jeff Swain has played 93% of the Cowboys snaps. That is the fourth highest percentage rate for a tight end in the league, only behind Ertz, Kelsey, and Jack Doyle back when he was healthy.
Yeah.
So he's on the field all the time. He's constantly on the field. He's getting more targets as Dak gets used to him.
Mhm.
I think he will be effective going forward as a low-end tight end one option, but not this week, not against Jacksonville. And I also want to sit Austin Hooper. I expect that to be a high-scoring game, as I said, but Hooper usually doesn't get double-digit targets. He could fall in the end zone, but I really think that this could be a squeaky wheel game for Julio Jones. I think they're going to target him when they get near the end zone or the red zone. I think the whole narrative of Julio can't score touchdowns. Yep, I see you there, Ryan.
Get in the end zone.
I just traded for him in a league myself because a lot of fancy players are down on him.
Mhm.
There's no need to be down on Julio. He's still a top 10 receiver with 0 touchdowns.
That's true.
So once he starts scoring, I mean, positive regression has to kick in eventually. He's not going to go all season without a touchdown. I think this is the week. This is the week he scores. I'm going to go out. He scores twice this week.
Ooh, you heard it here. Al Dente Fantasy. And I would love for that to happen, Josh. So
Well,
that's
just to reinforce that, Julio Jones has played his best games against Tampa Bay. So I mean, that's a little added fact there. So
there you
I
go.
definitely expect him to score this week too.
There you go. I like it. Ummer, any other sits tight end wise? Or
Sits, I think Charles Clay in that Buffalo offense, I think he's almost droppable. I think at this point he's just not involved in that offense at all. Same game, Cleveland and Los Angeles Chargers. Sit both tight ends, David Njoku, Antonio Gates. Antonio Gates, I think, is still getting used to that offense. And, I mean, we've talked about it before, but this Cleveland defense is pretty stout. So
Yep.
definitely avoid any Los Angeles Chargers passing options if you can. Keenan Allen may be able to bust a few, but I think Antonio Gates will get limited. David Njoku, I know he's getting more involved in the Cleveland offense, but I don't expect him to go off against the Los Angeles Chargers defense, who's actually been pretty good against opposing tight ends. So those are two sits I have as well.
yeah, and Gates to this point seems more of a touchdown vulture at best. Virgil Green is still
Yeah.
getting the lion's share of the snaps there.
Well, Well, Ryan, Virgil Green's actually out for the year because he had the torn ACL.
You're right.
So Antonio Gates, I think, will get more involved, especially because of that injury.
Yeah.
But short term, I think it's still going to take a little bit of time. And just like you said, very touchdown dependent. But I think as the season progresses, especially when we get closer to playoff push time, both fantasy wise and regular season wise, he'll get a lot more involvement. And he's just he's a seasoned veteran. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer for sure. So and that chemistry of Rivers is definitely going to rekindle and he'll get a lot better. But yeah, short term, I think he's very touchdown dependent.
yeah, one tight end I want to ask a question on because just seeing who his quarterback is and the talent he has, do you see either of you, Kyle Rudolph, really coming into. I mean, he's been. I wouldn't call him bad start because he's basically averaged 9 or so points every week. So I mean, he's at least giving you points production somewhat. I think at the tight end position, in my opinion, if you can get double digits, you're getting decent production, and so he's right on that threshold. But do you see him and Kirk Cousins? Is he a guy if you don't say you have a Charles Clay or an Antonio Gates or you're literally spot starting tight ends? Is he a guy you would maybe see being able to buy low and go after, or is he you're seeing as a 7 to 9 point total guy all year long?
I think with the state of tight ends, what it is, you can't sit Rudolph. He's one of those guys that, like you said, he's gonna get some points, And if you can guarantee me even 5, 6, 7 points out of my tight end, if you can tell me for sure he's gonna get that, I'm fine with it. I mean, he doesn't have the upside as as an Ertz or a Kelsey or potentially even a Jimmy Graham. He doesn't quite have the same upside as Graham, but he's a solid start. As I said, but the state of tight ends, what it is, you can't get away from. You can't sit Rudolph. He's not who he was last year. Kirk Cousins, loves throwing out to Thielen and throwing out to Diggs. So he's not quite as good as he was, but he's not. He's a top 8 tight end at worst. I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily go out and trade for him because, like I said, if I'm going to trade for a tight end, I'm going to try to trade for one of the big guys. But if you have him, you can never sit him.
Yeah, and especially if you don't have one of the top three tight ends, Kelsey, Gronkowski, Ertz, you don't need that much production from your tight end because I'm pretty sure the rest of your roster is pretty stacked. So you probably have good receivers, running backs, possibly a top tier quarterback as well. So yeah, when you can get 8 to 9 points, possibly 10, with your starting tight end as a Kyle Rudolph or somebody else, that's good enough for your fantasy roster. You don't need such high production. So if you have Rudolph, it's definitely an every week start, even with those few points that he's getting for you. But yeah, you're not depending on him to get you like a huge amount of like 15 or plus points to help you win your week, as opposed to like other positions like running back and receivers where it's more crucial that you get more points from them every week. So
Yeah,
Yep.
100% agree. Last point on that, I just think something can be said if like you said, if you're taking a guy like Rudolph, you probably got him in the eighth, ninth, 10th, later rounds, so you have
exactly.
that higher production from the other positions. That being said, that means you probably have 4 or 5 receivers or 4 or 5 running backs. Guess what? You can only start 2 or 3 if
Exactly.
you're putting him in the flex. You probably have a fourth or fifth receiver slash running back option that is putting up double digit point totals that you can now go and trade for that Kyle Rudolph because say your tight end is giving you 2, 3, 0, 5 points, get that 9, 10 guarantee, give the guy on your bench who's giving, maybe you have a Tyler Lockett who's averaging 13, 14, but you're not going to start him over your Mike Evans, over your Julio Jones, and kind of
Mhm.
double down on that, and you kind of just up your ante on your starting and kind of maybe weaken your bench a little bit. But anyway, I'm ranting. Just a little thought there I had for that.
Well, I was actually thinking the opposite, where it's like if you drafted Kyle Rudolph and you drafted him pretty late, you probably have, like you said, those good options from your previous rounds. So you could probably actually pair one of those guys with Kyle
Yeah.
Rudolph
Yeah.
and go after a big three sort of tight end. So I would probably actually think about that.
Other
So
side of the
a
spectrum,
good,
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
Target the owner that's been hit by injuries. Target the Leonard Fournette owner. Target the Dalvin Cook owner. Target the guy who drafted Jared McKinnon before he tore his ACL. And maybe you'll get lucky and one of those guys has Gronk, Kelsey, Ertz, and then say hey even someone like James White who you probably
yeah.
got late. You got good running backs and you got like a James White and a Kyle Rudolph. Offer that to the Ertz owner. Maybe you'll get lucky.
Yeah, I like that. So, little side note, actually, Talon, our managing editor here at Sports Dente, in a league with him, and he has Dalvin Cook and Leonard Fournette. Kind of an unfortunate.
Ooh, fun
Probably
times.
looked good on the draft board and has
Yeah.
not panned out. So, defense, as anyone that watches the show, we don't spend too much time on it. I'm not super high on start. I mean, you know your big ones, but do you guys want to give a sleeper defense start? Obviously, the big ones, Tennessee, Jacksonville are going to be automatic starts no matter what. But who are your, I guess, one sleeper start and one sit you absolutely are dropping and picking someone else up?
I mean, I don't really have a lot of good sleepers because, as you said, for defense, it's pretty much the same every week. I mean, you start your good defenses, you play your matchups. I like Green Bay a lot this week against San Francisco. I like Green Bay as a good defense. I like, you know, I it's hard to say, but maybe even Denver. Denver has a good pass rush, and because of that, weather situation, I'm almost never, ever going to recommend starting the defense against the Rams. But if there were a week, this
Yeah.
could be the week.
And with how bad Denver's defense was last week, I expect a bounce back
Right,
week for sure.
right.
Agreed. Agreed. 100% agree on that one. One start that I have that may not be as popular is Cincinnati against Pittsburgh. I know Pittsburgh has a pretty dynamic offense, but I bet you in this divisional game it may be a little bit more low scoring than people are anticipating. So I like Cincinnati's Bengals. I like the Bengals defense to be a little bit more effective and prevent Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown and all these guys from going off. I think they're such dynamic players that they will get some fantasy production for sure, but I think the Bengals defense will be able to prevent them from being as effective. So
Yeah.
I'd like them in the stream start option. And two sits for sure. Same game, Chiefs Patriots. I expect that to be completely offensive game for sure. So
Yeah.
Chiefs defense has been historically bad. I know they had that week one. They had that week outlier against Jacksonville where they had what it was 3 turnovers, I believe. One of them went for a touchdown. So I think that's a bit of an outlier. Their defense is not that great. And the Patriots defense is pretty good, and I expect them to game plan pretty well for Patrick Mahomes. But I still think, based on what we've seen from Patrick Mahomes, that guy has just been able to just maneuver his way and just find a way to move the ball down the field and look pretty good doing it. So, yeah, that will limit how effective the Patriots defense will be.
Yeah. I do want to mention this, Summer. The last time, I think it was week 3, you said start Baltimore defense against Pittsburgh, and me and Josh kind of scoffed at you. And I believe Baltimore held Pittsburgh to under 20 points and had a very
It,
efficient fantasy. They didn't go off by any means, but
Yeah.
they didn't hurt you. So that
Exactly.
Cincinnati start, not as crazy as it sounds, maybe you're onto something there.
yeah, maybe.
Well, great. Let's get to a couple quick questions, and then we will move to DFS and wrap up the show. Uh, Josh, to you, Tyler Boyd against Pittsburgh or Emmanuel Sanders against the Rams?
Ooh, Tyler Boyd. As I said, I love Tyler Boyd and AJ Green this week. Pittsburgh gives up the third most fantasy points to wide receivers. Emmanuel Sanders has he's probably surpassed Demarius as the number one receiver in that offense. So were it a different situation, I could see going Sanders. But again, as we've said, because of that weather, I think that could be a running game for both teams. So give me Tyler Boyd.
Yeah, Tyler Boyd almost seems like a must start now every week.
Yep.
Agreed. Agreed.
Let's see here. Okay, for Umar, we'll go to you for a PPR flex position. Eckler or Corey Davis? Kind of an interesting one.
Ooh, that is pretty interesting. So I do like Eckler's effectiveness, especially as a breather option for Melvin Gordon and his ability in the passing game. And I wouldn't be surprised if he actually turns into one of those running backs that has been a backup his whole life. He goes to a new team and he becomes a number one and is just a fantasy star for the rest of his years. But for the short term, I liked him in these brief moments. Corey Davis, I think, can be effective, but against Baltimore, it may be a little bit questionable. And with less receiving options opposite of him, Corey Davis will get covered a lot more, double covered, stack coverage, whatever you want to call it. So in this case, I would like Austin Eckler over Corey Davis.
Yeah,
Completely agree.
yeah, he seems to with how great Melvin Gordon has been, and he's been what a
Yeah.
top 2 or 3 running back so far.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Eckler has still been productive as a second down back.
Mhm.
He still gets
Mhm.
points. So uh, interesting against Cleveland, but yeah, I like it over Davis still too. I agree with you. Josh, okay, it's 4 players, so try to listen.
Oh,
Kind of
all right.
confusing. Okay,
All right.
sit one PPR. So you have to pick one to sit.
Okay.
Godwin at Atlanta, Ridley versus Tampa Bay, Boyd versus Pittsburgh, and Sanu versus Tampa Bay.
Whew. Well, with this, I mean, you probably don't want to start two receivers from the same game if you can help it. But I wouldn't. Oh man, see, it wouldn't be so bad if one of them was like, if one is a Julio or one's an AJ Green or an Antonio Brown, like starting Brown and Juju is totally fine.
Yeah,
Or starting in this case, starting Green and Boyd is totally fine. But between Ridley and Sanu, while I do expect that game to be very high scoring, I don't expect both of them to have incredible success. And unfortunately, it's kind of a crapshoot picking between the two. I would sit Sanu, however. Out of that list, I like Ridley more. He's scored, the most touchdowns on that team, most touchdowns for any rookie receiver this year, infinitely more touchdowns than Julio Jones.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, so I would sit Sanu. Although it's possible Sanu has a better game than Godwin because Godwin is going to take over that role, over the number 2 receiver role from Deshaun Jackson. We just don't know when. We don't know when it'll happen. It could be this week. It could be 3 weeks from now. So it's definitely between Godwin and Sanu. My gut says to sit Sanu because I don't want to start 2 receivers from the same team.
Yeah, I agree. Mine would have been Sanu also.
Yeah, I agree with that one as well.
All right, Ummer. Quick one. Quarterback: Jameis Winston or Deshaun Watson?
I like Deshaun Watson. I know we're really praising James Winston in this new revitalized offense, but Deshaun Watson has looked a lot more effective over the past few weeks, and they're playing Buffalo, so I expect him to do pretty well in this actually not divisional matchup, but just I expect him to look better compared to James Winston.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
do.
Go ahead.
The only thing I want to jump in if that's okay,
Yeah,
Ryan.
yeah.
I do disagree a little there, Umar, only because he has what they described as a bruised chest. Now I don't know how serious it is, but he is considered questionable for the game. I'm sure he's obviously going to play,
Hmm.
but I could see them getting out to a decent lead and then taking it easy, not throwing the ball, not opening him up to get hit. So I don't. I think they win this game. I think they could go out and score early, and then in the second half, not air the ball out as much. So personally, I would lean Jameis. If it were a different situation, if he didn't have the injury, and if they weren't playing against a team that I expect not to be very competitive, I would totally be with you with Watson. But for this week, personally, I would go Jameis. But it's
Okay.
okay to disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, both options are actually pretty good. So yeah, I totally agree with you too, Josh. The only reason I like Deshaun Watson better is because I don't like the running game in Houston. So
True.
that's why I think Watson will be a little bit more effective compared to Jameis Winston, which I know Tampa Bay doesn't have a good running game either,
Yeah.
but but yeah, I think just overall they're both good options. But personally for me, I prefer Deshaun Watson.
Okay.
Cool. Let's do 2 or 3 more. So Josh, we'll keep with you. Um, Alfred Morris, Latavius Murray, Lamar Miller. Start one.
Uh, well, now that we know, I would have said Alf. I honestly would have, but now that we know Dalvin Cook's out, I'm gonna lean Murray. I do want to stay away from that situation, as we said earlier, but I mean, none of these guys are stars, obviously. Um, it's definitely between Alf and Murray. Murray, I think, is a slightly better option in PPR. If it's standard, I could see you going Alf. He's the only show in town. Um, but if it's PPR, I would lean towards Murray because he does have a history of catching passes.
There you go. All right. Last one here, Ummer. We'll do it for you. Flex PPR: Quincy Enunwa or Adrian Peterson.
As we talked about, Adrian Peterson's questionable coming into this game, and against Carolina, I don't like him being all that effective anyways. So I'd probably go Quincy Enunwa. As we talked about, he's definitely revitalized a bit of his fantasy stock after being injured last year, and just he had a breakout year. He had the injury, and then now he's finally coming back. And I think people are slow to get on that Quincy Enunwa bandwagon, whereas here I think he's a better option compared to Adrian Peterson.
Yep.
All right. There you have it. Chris Thompson, I believe, is out, but yeah, I do agree. I think they're still going to have a split backfield even with him out because Peterson's a little banged up as well. So,
Yeah.
all right, well, let's move. Last segment here, our little DFS lineups for you guys betting degenerates out there. You have 15 minutes to submit your lineups before the 10 o'clock game starts, so we'll bang these out real quick so you can jump on. What's kind of great about this segment is Josh uses FanDuel, Umar uses DraftKings, so it gets you a little bit across the board. Who would like to start?
Let me jump in real quick because I may have to exit here a couple minutes early,
Yeah.
just in case. My DFS lineup for FanDuel. So FanDuel uses three wide receivers, 2 running backs, quarterback, tight end, flex, and defense. No kicker. So for my quarterback, I like Jameis. And by the way, I've already put this lineup in, so I know that you can start all these players with the budget.
Perfect.
So I like Jameis at quarterback. For running back, we're going to save a little. We're going to go Chris Carson and TJ Yeldon. Wide receivers, where we're going to pay up, we're going to go Julio, AJ Green, and Juju Smith-Schuster. Tight end, Cameron Brate. Flex, here's where we're going to go deep. This is my sleeper play of the week. I'm going to go Antonio Callaway. We spent most of our budget on our receivers already with Julio, AJ Green, and Juju. So we got to save somewhere. We're going to save it flex with Antonio Callaway. Higgins is out in that game. So Antonio Callaway is going to be starting. We already talked about Baker Mayfield as a potential sleeper quarterback for this week. The Chargers should put up some points, and I expect them, the Browns to be behind. Baker's going to be throwing. Callaway, he's had multiple targets from Baker, deep targets down the field. He's just dropped them. So the opportunity is there. If he can catch those passes, he could go off. And defense, of course, the Bears.
I like it. We need a sound effect for that sleeper, the Al Dente sleeper of the week. I'll get on that this week. We get a little sound effect. So great. DraftKings.
Sure. So the lineup that I inserted is actually spanning from today and going into the Monday night game tomorrow. So I got Aaron Rodgers as my quarterback. I think just the San Francisco secondary and just the defense overall has just not been good at all. So Aaron Rodgers, even with the gimpy knee, I know he re-injured it last week against Detroit, but I think he'll still be just as dynamic as before. A little bit of a long-term revenge after being not drafted number 1 overall. So I think he's got a little bit of hate there still. So I expect him to do well. As we talked about, Devontae Freeman is out, so I like Tevin Coleman. He's a pretty good option as well. Relatively cheap, I believe on salary. He's only $5,400 on DraftKings, so that's actually a pretty good steal there. Other running back I like is James White. Pay up for that. He's going to do pretty well against Kansas City. Receivers, I like Julian Edelman, as we talked about. He was suspended 4 games, but he came back and he looked just as dynamic as before. Expect him in the second week to improve upon that. Julio Jones, as we talked about, I think this is finally the week that he gets into the end zone, possibly even twice, as Josh called out. So we'll see
Love
about
it.
that. As another value pick, Tyler Lockett in England, I think definitely that's going to be a great matchup for him. As we said, leading the team in targets, looking a little bit more effective in the short term compared to Doug Baldwin against Oakland. That's a must start. Cameron Brate, as Josh said, that's just a great option. Like I said, James Winston's favorite target. Chris Carson, I put in my flex, a really good cheap option at 4,400. And yeah, same Bears defense as well. I think they're just going to obliterate Miami. And that's knowing now, especially that Brock Osweiler is going to be playing. It's just like, that's a must start for sure.
No
so
matter
pay
what,
up for the Bears defense.
buy the Bears defense. So,
Yeah.
well, there you have it. Whatever platform you're using, those are your lineups. Let us know if you input them. Let us know if you win some money. We'd love to hear feedback on that. Hopefully you do.
How accurate are we?
Yeah.
Let's see that.
I'm gonna input both of them. We'll see what happens. So I'm trusting you guys. Gentlemen, pleasure as always. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Al Dente Fantasy Football Show live on Sunday mornings. It's about 12 minutes to kickoff. So enjoy your Sundays, guys, and we'll reconvene next week.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks,
a lot,
guys.
fellas.